Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Levin, the director of the Cleveland Heights University Library, and today I am joined by Mary Cole Watson. Mary was born in Ansonia, Connecticut, and she was the second of 11 children. She has a strong connection to her African ancestors since her father is from Freetown in Sierra Leone. Her world was often marred by chaos and confusion. Her mother suffered from an undiagnosed bout of mental illness, and while her father suffered from alcoholism. And like many young men of color during the 1950s, this was brought on by the many circumstances that he faced. Before Mary was whisked off to spend some of her more formative years in foster care, she had already made up her mind that she wanted to be a teacher. As early as the age of 6, she found herself challenging the minds of her younger brothers and sisters with math, reading, and language writing in their makeshift classroom. Lined up on the floor in front of their bed, she would firmly articulate the correct spelling of the word of the day to her younger brother, Gerard. Mary graduated from SUNY College at Brockport with a degree in African American Studies, and this brave young soldier grew from being a self-loathing burden of the state of New York to an award-winning teacher who instilled cultural pride in her African American students. Mary got a master's in early childhood education and reading from the University of Toledo and went on to be an educator at the Cleveland Heights University Heights High School District for 33 years. I'm sorry, the University Heights. Oh man, see, it's hard to talk on Zoom. The Cleveland Heights University Heights School District for 33 years and served as an elementary school teacher, a high school reading teacher, race relations facilitator, Title I reading director, and reading assessor. She was awarded a fellowship and coached distance cross-country, track, and field while at the high school. Mary taught her final years in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. She is a current member of the Cleveland Rape Crisis Board and a member of the Board for Racial Equity. And now I introduce to you Miss Mary Cole Watson.
Thank you so much.
You good?
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Mary, we're here to talk about a book that you have just published. It is called Wisdom Warriors, and there is the beautiful cover for everyone to see. So why don't you introduce us to Sky and the two main adult characters, Grandma Mary and Grandpa Marv.
Okay, Sky is based on my youngest daughter, Miranda. She's a precocious African-American young lady who has tremendous cultural pride, and she's quite resilient. Her name is Sky because the sky is limitless, and the sky brings a huge smile to someone's face. And I wanted my character to make others very happy.
Excellent. And what about Grandpa Marv and Grandma Mary?
Okay, Grandma Mary and Grandpa Marv is my husband and I. I'm Grandma Mary. I graduated with a degree in African American history, and so did my husband. And so we just felt it was our duty to share what we learned in our African American study courses with our students. He was a guidance counselor, and so he shared a lot of his information developing programs for African American males and with his African American young ladies. Tremendous cultural information that we learned from our favorite professor. And it was important to me when I decided to teach to make sure I included cultural information, because I remember how devastated I was for not knowing the truths that I learned in my African American history courses.
That is understandable. So how did your experiences growing up influence the choices of what you call taboo subjects that you address in your book, Wisdom Warriors?
You know, the reality is that those taboo subjects are experienced directly by far too many African American children, including myself. And when you don't discuss taboo subjects, they just fester and they don't get resolved. And what happens is a child's self-esteem is catastrophically destroyed to the point where they disengage from school, they disengage from other types of opportunities that maybe they need to avail themselves of. And so it's just it's just something that has to be talked about, especially if a kid brings it up. No question, any question a child brings up should be answered, but in child appropriate language. So regardless of whether it's taboo or not, because children face these circumstances.
Okay. So I just read in your bio that you were a cross-country coach and your husband was also a coach. How do you see coaches using the book?
Well, I really hope that coaches read the book and use the book, because throughout my coaching experience, and as an avid sports spectator, I witnessed far too much racism that was absolutely traumatic to the athletes. And I saw too many coaches expecting African-American children to turn the other cheek, but not addressing what is happening with the white athletes. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if they're calling the children names, they're just say ignore it. But that's difficult to ignore. Yeah. And so what happens is, and I also saw, quite frankly, when we go to cross country meets or to track and field meets, we would stay at certain hotels, and the hotel employees would look at some of our athletes with repulsed expressions on their face. Some of the guests would look at the kids and treat the kids differently. And it was just really blatant. But our cross-country students, track and field, the student athletes knew that we would not tolerate that. So if something occurred, they would report it to the head coach or one of his assistants, and we would take care of it. But many times when we visit the West Side, for example, if I was watching a basketball game, I would see coaches intentionally call fouls that were not fouls. I would hear people from the audience yelling the N-word dressed up in blackface. And I went up and addressed a particular incident on the West Side, and I was told, well, it's all in fun. And I said, but it's not all in fun. And I made such a fuss that they, told the students to stop. The children didn't leave, but yeah, they had to stop cheering what they were cheering.
Boy, that must have been so difficult for you and for the students. And it's hard to be told to turn the other cheek when it's wrong.
Right.
Grandma Mary was being followed in a store, and I was so proud of her for going to the manager and telling her experience. And it reminded me of the story you just told me. Have you done that?
That actually happened. I went into Marshall's, and I was shopping around, and I noticed this woman kept following me, and it was the middle of winter, and she didn't have a name tag, she didn't have a coat on. And so to me, it was obvious that she was watching me. Mm-hmm. And I immediately became upset because there was nothing in my behavior to let her know that she needed to follow me. But on the same token, we know, Black people and white people know that we are more under surveillance, the African Americans. And so while she's watching me, there's white people who know she's watching me that feel free to steal. And so that was a real incident. And then further on in the story, when I went up to the counter, that actually happened. The cashier was engaging in this absolutely happy conversation with this woman. It didn't appear that she knew the woman. It just, the woman went up to her and she said, hello, and had this. And so I was looking forward to the same thing. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I walked up to the counter, she put her head down. She just started scanning the items, told me what the cost was. I felt so devalued and dismissed. And so I actually did ask to speak to the manager, and the manager did give me 30% off and was absolutely wonderful because she had seen me in the store numerous times.
Yeah, great. And so I think what was also interesting was that you modeled the behavior in the book for Sky.
Right,
The 10-year-old is smart enough to know and to learn from how her grandmother stood up for herself and
right,
didn't allow herself to be demeaned. And what I like about your book is some of it is overt and some of it is just you just watch this happen. So
right,
it's not didactic. You're not wagging a finger and saying you must do this. You're showing
right,
by example
right.
how Sky can learn from her grandmother's behavior. And I think that's a really great way to talk to teachers and parents and coaches. So that impressed me about the book. There was another story that you shared, both in story 12 and 13 about police brutality.
Mhm.
And the day that we are taping this, we have just witnessed yet again
Yeah,
another incident in Wisconsin with a man being shot 7 times in front of his children while he was getting to his car. So I feel like we could talk about this forever, and it's very hard, it's heavy. But how do you recommend parents, how should they talk to their children about violence against Black people and the police?
well, depending on the age of the child. For example, if the child is young, I would ask the child, what do you think the job of the police is? And then just get their answer. And depending on what their answer is, will determine where you go next.
Mhm.
So if the child comes up with, I just see the police killing people, then, well, I mean, that's the reality. A lot of,
Yeah,
people don't realize that kids recognize racism as early as age 3. I just read that in the New York Times this past Sunday, on different levels, of course. And so a lot of kids are watching this, and even if they're not watching it, they hear their parents talk about it.
mhm.
So, they're very aware of what happens to that. They're very aware that African Americans are criminalized. They're very aware of that. And so by pretending that it's not real, is doing a tremendous disservice to them. So what you need to do is recognize that these things happen, but let them know that that masses of people are fighting against it, and that and for their own safety, let them know certain things that they need to do to help protect themselves. There was also a study recently that said a lot of teachers actually think that kids are at least African American kids are at least 4 years older than they are, so that they treat their unconsciously. This is where unconscious bias comes in. They treat their African American students differently. One of the things I want people to realize is very few people are unaffected by structural racism. Very few people. It's woven into the fabric of our country. And so instead of beating ourselves up with whether we have unconscious bias, what we need to do is educate ourselves. Because I was impressed with this quote I just read the other day by this famous Greek philosopher that said, the greatest skill in life is to unlearn what is untrue. And so when I went to Brockport State and majored in African American history and learned the beauty of my culture, the resilience of my culture, the beauty of the continent. Of course, not all place, but no place we all have our areas of dysfunction.
Mhm.
But in general, I fell in love with being African when I went to Brockport State. And I wanted my students to feel that same love, because if you love yourself, no matter how badly somebody treats you, you will fight against it, but you will love yourself. And it's important to me that kids love themselves, because if they don't love themselves, they can't reach their potential. They are turned off to school, they're turned off to life. As a matter of fact, suicide rate among African American kids has skyrocketed. And the Society of Infectious Disease had quoted about 2 months ago that structural racism is more harmful to African American kids and kids of color than all infectious diseases, including COVID-19.
Wow.
And so that is a powerful, powerful statement to make, that people need to reflect on and act on to save our children.
Right. It affects, structural racism affects the oppressed and the oppressor.
Yes.
We waste energy and love and resources because this exists. And so
Yes.
we're all a victim in a way, certainly not to the same degree, but I know that the city of Milwaukee passed a resolution, and then a few months later, the city of Cleveland passed a resolution that said that racism was a health crisis.
Yes.
What you're saying just confirms what that resolution
Yes.
stands for. Okay. So further on in the book, we see you give us a nice shout out for libraries. You seem to also stress the importance of healthy eating throughout the book. And I was wondering, I mean, you made a very conscious effort kidding around about Grandpa giving the unhealthy snacks. Sounds like my house. And Grandma was saying, no, you have to have fruit. Tell me about this, what you're trying to share about nutrition.
Okay, what I'm trying to share about nutrition is the fact that 32% of African American children live in extreme poverty. And how you eat affects the diseases that you will come down with as an adult. And not only does it affect the diseases you come down with as an adult, but it affects your learning. It affects you permanently, sometimes parts of the brain that have to do with cognitive abilities. And so if you are malnourished physically, your mind is malnourished, and you also can't focus on what you need to focus on, primarily school.
Right. Wonderful. So we get to meet some of Sky's friends,
Yes.
and one of them is Jay. And Sky comes home very upset one day because Jay had been embarrassed by other kids at school because his uncle was released from prison. And they were making fun of him for having someone in his family who had gone to jail. And you share how the uncle fought for years to be exonerated. Where did this story come from? Tell us more.
It was a true story. It came directly out of the New York Times, a story on a particular inmate and an incarcerated person. And the article was also focused on the fact that more African Americans are innocent of the crimes than are not, okay? Most people are not aware of that. And so what happens is they're punished twice. They're punished they have to give up so much of their life in prison, and to add insult to injury, when they get out, they can't find a job. And there was a study that said that white incarcerated men seem to get jobs over men who had not even been incarcerated, African American men, okay? And so, you know, what this does to a family, breaks up the family, what this does to kids, and this is real with them making fun of him when he was exonerated. And so in my book, it was really important to be proactive about everything and to help kids feel resilient and empowered. And so that's why I had the suggestion that maybe the principal could have him come in and talk about, that he was exonerated and how he was able to deal with it. And then the students would get, a different view of how they really should be looking at Jay's uncle with pride, because he was resilient and he didn't come out bitter, and he came out and he was loved by so many in his family. So that's why every story has a solution, so that kids feel hopeful, and so that kids know that through education on all levels, from going into the classroom and talking for speaker day, to reading information. And when I gave a shout out to the library, oh my goodness, I am in love with libraries. And I have to say that the customer service in library has been consistent, and that has not been the same for other areas that customers go. Librarians love to help you. They absolutely love it. And they're just, all of them are just so cheerful, and they will work so hard to find you what it is you're looking for. And so there's many reasons to love the library.
Well, we have our own dark history as well. There are many instances of libraries that were segregated.
Yes.
But I'm very happy
Yes.
you've had that experience here in Cleveland. That's great. We try very hard. We all try very hard. So tell us a little bit more about the role of the extended family. Sky's parents are involved, but they go to work, right?
Yes.
Tell me
Yes.
about Grandma and Grandpa and what you think about that.
Okay, now the reality that I have is not the reality for a lot of other African American homes. A lot of African American homes are headed by a single parent, and a lot of homes don't have the luxury of the grandparents picking up the child. But it is my reality. I am a retired teacher. If my grandchild lived in Cleveland, I don't have a grandchild, by the way.
Okay.
But if I had a grandchild, I would be able to pick up that grandchild every day. And my husband, even though he's retired, he still works as a paraprofessional in a school district. But if we had a grandchild, I have a feeling he might not be working. And even if he was working, he'd have the summers off. And so he'd probably be the one to be much more engaged in Sky's life than the grandmother, because he would want to make up for lost time during the school year. But we have always been a creative people, and where there's a will, there's a way. So even though a lot of homes are headed up by by single females, there are ways around becoming an extended family, even if it's not your extended biological family.
Right.
And so we need to make sure we do that, because when you mentioned briefly about me being a foster child, I wanted so badly for someone to love me. And it always bothered me that people didn't feel that they needed to treat other people's children as if that child was their own. I always treated my students as if they were my biological children, because African tradition teaches you that. It tells you that you are their parent. Yeah. And so we need to reach out more in the community if we don't have family that can help us like Sky has.
Right. I also was a single mother for a long time, and we had neighbors who were very close, and my parents and my ex-laws, my divorced grandparents were all so helpful. So I totally understood that, and that's probably why it resonated with me. And I will just go on to say that this book is not written for only African American children or adults. It's for everyone.
Yes.
I learned so much from reading it, and I thought it would be great to share with all library customers, because we all need to learn more about how to address these things with children. There's a part in the book where Grandpa says, you don't really have to read the paper. He was worried about protecting Sky from the terrible things in the paper. Right. It's hard to protect a child. They know what's going on.
They do. Especially now, because parents forget, there's so much turmoil going on in the world, so much chaos. Mm-hmm. And the parents are having a hard time dealing with it. And as they're dealing with it, they deal with it by talking about it a lot. And a lot of times they don't realize that their child is listening to their every word.
The ears have walls, right? Let's see. Tell me about what Grandma Mary would say today, where schooling is online and we are so worried about students falling behind. Right. And we worry about equity in education. So perhaps Black children might fall even further behind if they don't have the support that they are used to getting. So what would we tell them? What should we tell them?
You know, that is the reality. They are going to fall further behind because affluent parents are creating these pods. They're hiring tutors, they're hiring teachers. They are able to create all these types of learning situations. They have jobs where they can be flexible, and we don't have that luxury. Unfortunately, a lot of the African American parents and single parents have to be out there exposing themselves. You know, it's really scary. So, you know, it's an individual decisions about how to handle that. You know, the bottom line is we have to, you know, we have to maybe get on social media and Google, be creative, Google certain resources that could help us with substituting for what we can't get.
Right.
And it goes back to us making a way where there's no way. Because they were saying a lot of more African American parents were actually homeschooling. I don't know how that was because of racism, when they felt, you know, certain parents were so upset with how their kids were being treated that more were homeschooling than prior. But I don't know about what that percentage is, you know, right before the pandemic occurred. But we have to find a way, like we've always done, because
Yes.
that is our reality. And we can't be hopeless about it. We have to be proactive about it. And so we have to do our research.
And I would say call the library.
Yes.
I've purchased software. We at our library, we purchased tutor.com, which is in-person tutoring. And
Wonderful.
I'm thinking about if I had to teach my children high-level math today, I would be crying.
Yes. Yes.
To do that.
Yes.
So I would be the parent on tutor.com at 10 o'clock at night saying, I have to show my child how to do this tomorrow, and I don't know how to do it. So one piece of advice I would give was call your library and say, do you have resources? We also have all kinds of books and things and sheets that we could print out and other ways we can steer you. So that is free to everyone. And but it's quite a situation we're in. And from day to day, who knows what's going to happen. Before I ask you my last question, I'll ask you another current events question. And when this is available to the public, it will be October. But we just had an incident in America where a African Black woman was just nominated to be Vice President of the United States. I have a feeling that somehow that would have made its way into your book.
Yes, it would have. It would have.
So if I were Sky and I said, Grandma, who is this person? Why is everyone talking about her? What would you tell me?
I would tell you that the reason everyone's talking, well, Sky actually is very precocious. So Sky would know why everybody's talking about her because she's African American. So that's the reality. And people might say, well, you know, and again, this goes back to kids are very aware of cultural differences. And so, you know, to be honest, Sky would be able to tell me why this is important to her, the same way that she felt when after African American History Month, after that assembly, and she gets into the car and she's crying. I was crying as I wrote that piece, I have to be honest, because as a teacher, it bothered me deeply that African American History Month was never celebrated the way I felt it should have been in the schools. It was mainly celebrated by having soul food dinner once, during the month of February. And that outraged me. It outraged me because it reduced us to only knowing how to cook. And so when you brought up the fact that this book was meant for all people, I wrote the book primarily for African Americans, but for all, because that's where the solutions come in, where we get to see what needs to happen. A pediatric neurologist told me that this is the first time she has a book that she can recommend to her patients. and this is a white woman. There's
Yes.
been the accolades have come from just as many white people as African American people for the book. And so I created that 28 lessons so that even if schools did not celebrate African American History Month, it would give an African American child a way to celebrate himself every day of that special month by either journaling, by either having a conversation with a parent, you know, or looking up more information about particular lessons. So Sky would be crying. Sky would be crying over Kamala Harris.
And what you just mentioned, I'll just go on to say, at the back of the book, there are 28 lessons for American youth. And this is what you would share, or Sky would be doing, that are affirmations and activities that we could share with children or even adults, to show self-respect and self-love, and to honor the heritage that is so proud and beautiful that we need to be honoring.
Right.
So, so I think I've asked you all my questions. If you want to sum up what you'd like people to know about the book, and maybe you could also remind them how they could get a copy of it.
Of course. Well, in a nutshell, Wisdom Warriors it has three main characters: Grandpa Marv, Grandma Mary, and their granddaughter Sky. Yes. And the grandparents are warriors of knowledge, leading Sky through her daily challenges of, you know, through racism and other challenges that she experiences. And Sky is a warrior of resilience and cultural pride because of the knowledge that her grandparents instill in her. People can buy the book at wisdomwarriors2020.com. Again, that's wisdomwarriors2020.com. And if you go on my website, I am reading a story from my book, and the title of it is Reading, and please enjoy that story.
Okay, and the Heights Library will also have a number of copies that you can check out for free. And people in the CleveNet system can also get it just by going into the catalog. So Mary, thank you so much. It was wonderful getting to know you through the book. As you know, I do know your husband through my Works and Rec days. We are just so proud that we have people in our community who share such wisdom with us. And we hope to speak to you again, and we wish you great, great success.
Thank you so much, Nancy.
Thank you.
Thank you.